September 1968 brought cameras into the old hall and risk onto the schedule. The Johnny Cash show went live with rules Johnny refused to learn. He booked who he wanted, said what he meant. When Bob Dylan walked onto the stage, producers stiffened. Different worlds, wrong audience. Johnny stood his ground. During rehearsal, Dylan paced, distracted, then leaned in when they sang together. On air, their voices met without trying to impress each other. Afterward, Dylan nodded once. "You beat them," he said. "The suits." Johnny shook his head. "I stopped asking." In February 1969, San Quentin felt heavier than Folsom. Older walls, angrier men. When Johnny sang the new song and spat his fury into the microphone, the room surged. Benches rattled. Guards moved. One more verse, and it would break. Johnny saw it and stopped. Hard. Sudden. "Not today," he said. The words weren't surrender. They were control. The crowd settled. June shook behind the curtain, breath short. "You almost started a riot," she said. "I almost didn't stop," he answered. That summer he drove back to Dias. The house leaned like it always had. His father sat on the porch, time etched into him. They spoke of weather, of television. Then Ray said, flat and final, Jack would be proud. Johnny took it without chasing more. He didn't need the rest anymore. June waited by the car and didn't intrude. In February 1970, in a hockey arena in Canada, Johnny interrupted a song and asked June a question in front of everyone. No speech, no romance, just truth. Her answer was a small laugh and a practical yes that landed like certainty. He watched her cry for the first time and understood what staying looked like. A year later, Johnny stood on Vivian's porch and didn't ask forgiveness he couldn't earn. He asked for patience. A number passed from daughter to father. He folded it carefully and kept it. Time did what time does when you don't fight it. Calls were answered, then returned. Years later, a first album bore his daughter's name, and his hands helped shape it. When Elvis died in 1977, Johnny cried where people could see. "He warned me," he said. "I didn't listen fast enough." In 2003, old and thin, Johnny recorded one last song in a room full of artifacts. His voice carried everything he'd lost and kept. June had gone 4 months earlier. The silence knew her name. Asked if it was worth it. He didn't perform. "Ask my daughters," Johnny Cash said. "Let us know where you're watching from. And we hope you enjoy the story." Rain worked the tin roof of the small Baptist church in Dias like a drummer who wouldn't slow down. Inside, the air was heavy with wet coats and hush. 12-year-old John R. Cash stood too close to the open casket because stepping back felt like admitting it was real. His mother, Carrie, kept a hand on his shoulder, tight enough that, later, he would find bruises blooming under his shirt and decide he deserved them. His father, Ray, stayed off to the side, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on nothing. No tears, just muscle and silence. Jack's hands rested on his chest, wrapped in clean white bandages that looked wrong on a boy who'd always been moving. The week before, those hands had slipped near a circular saw at the mill. A mistake that took its time killing him. Days of fever, bandage changes, and the smell of medicine that never reached the part that hurt. John had been there that morning. He'd walked away to go fishing, telling himself there'd be time later. Now he stared at the bandages and tried to remember Jack's last clear words, because words were all he had left. "Don't work a factory like Daddy. Do something important." The preacher's voice rose and fell, but John heard only that sentence, again and again, like a nail being driven straight. 6 years later, Michigan felt like another planet. Metal, smoke, and noise. The auto plant swallowed daylight. The presses spoke in blunt, repeating impacts that vibrated through bone. Oil and hot steel lived in his clothes, no matter how hard he scrubbed. On a break, he opened a letter from home with hands that still smelled like machinery. His mother had written on the back of an electric bill, tight lines, practical, as if paper was too precious for emotion. She didn't soften it. She simply passed along what Ray had said. Not the son who should have died. John read it twice, then again, as if the words might change if he forced them to. That night he drank for the first time. Not a celebration, not a rebellion, just a way to quiet the voice that sounded like his father's, even when Ray was 1,000 miles away. Hours later, he woke on the tile floor of the plant bathroom, cheek against cold porcelain, stomach turned inside out, and one clean thought settled in. Leave. Not just the job. Himself. The recruiter didn't ask for poetry. He looked at John's hollow eyes and saw a body that would follow orders. The signature went down like a surrender. In West Germany, the Air Force gave him headphones, a receiver, and a job that ran on patience, intercepting Soviet transmissions, copying numbers, listening to static until meaning appeared. On a night shift in July 1951, around 3 in the morning, the barracks asleep behind him, he turned the dial and caught a thin thread of home. Nashville bleeding through interference. Grand Ole Opry. Then a voice, Hank Williams, distant but sharp enough to cut. I'm so lonesome I could cry. John didn't sob. He just sat very still and felt his face go wet for the first time since Jack's funeral. The song didn't solve anything. It did something smaller and more dangerous. It proved the ache could be shaped into sound. The next day, he bought a guitar from the Bass Exchange for $5, cheap wood and stubborn strings. At night, he wrote lines about death, loneliness, and blame. One song was for Jack. He never played it for anyone. Even on paper, it felt like touching a burn. By December 1954, San Antonio was supposed to be safety. He'd been out of the service 3 months, married to Vivian Liberto, the girl he'd written to from Germany, and selling appliances he couldn't afford himself. Their apartment was narrow, the walls thin, the future already leaning on them. Vivian was pregnant. One evening he came home to find her on the kitchen floor, shaking with a fury that wasn't fear. The cookie tin they used as a cash box lay tipped over, empty. $127. Everything. Gone. John looked at the overturned tin, then at Vivian's belly, then down at his own hands. Not a musician's hands, not yet, just a salesman's hands, tired and ordinary. His voice came out low, steady, almost polite. I'm going to be a singer. I'll make the money. I promise. Vivian didn't smile. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist and nodded like someone accepting a hard bet. Then do it fast, Johnny. We're having a baby. A week later, before dawn, he pointed the car toward Memphis, toward a small label called Sun Records, and a door he planned to wait beside until someone finally opened it. He reached Sun Records before sunrise, the sky still undecided. Memphis quiet in a way that made waiting feel louder. Johnny Cash leaned against the locked door and watched his breath fog the glass. 3 hours passed. Cars came and went. No one spoke to him. When Sam Phillips finally turned the key, the smell inside hit first. Old cigarettes, warm dust, electricity. Phillips didn't look at Johnny when he said, "What do you sing?" Gospel came out of Johnny's mouth because it was safe. 30 seconds in, Phillips raised a hand without turning around. "Son, I don't sell God." Bring me something that makes people forget him for a minute." Johnny nodded, embarrassed but not surprised. He left without arguing. A week later, he was back, hands shaking worse than before, singing "Hey Porter," a song about motion, distance, and wanting to be anywhere else. When he finished, Phillips said nothing. 5 minutes stretched, until Johnny felt sure he'd failed again. Then Phillips spoke, calm and exact. "Find a bass player and a guitar man. 2 weeks. Then we record." Outside, Johnny's hands trembled so badly he dropped his car keys. From a payphone he called Vivian and said only, "We're recording." He didn't trust himself with more words. By summer, "Cry, Cry, Cry" was climbing the charts. Suddenly, Nashville wanted him. The Ryman Auditorium smelled like old wood and expectations. Under the spotlight, Johnny felt exposed, his songs too quiet, too blunt. The applause never came. Backstage, a manager told him his music was too dark for family radio. Then a stranger stepped out of the shadows, handed him a card, and said softly, "When you're ready for something bigger, call me. Don Law, Columbia Records." Johnny dropped the card and picked it up like it might break. That December, Elvis Presley signed a deal that made headlines. The same month, Elvis called Johnny from a payphone somewhere warm and expensive. "They'll dress it up," Elvis warned. "Take your sound, take your money, then take your time. Sam's honest. Stay put." Johnny listened while watching Vivian through the apartment window, rocking their newborn daughter, bills spread on the table. "I can't wait," Johnny said. "I need real money. Now." The line went quiet. Then Elvis, no swagger left. "Be careful." In January 1956, Johnny signed with Columbia. 15 pages of fine print. A $10,000 advance that felt like oxygen. He didn't read the whole thing. Don Law smiled, shook his hand, talked about Nashville. That night, Johnny lay awake, chest tight, ignoring the warning he couldn't name. The move was fast. Nashville was clean and bright, and Columbia's studio felt nothing like Sun. Too big, too polite. Johnny brought Folsom Prison Blues. Don Law frowned. "Too grim. We need radio." Session musicians replaced Marshall Grant and Luther Perkins. Strings floated where the snap used to live. When the playback ended, Law clapped. "That's a hit." Johnny smiled and told Marshall it went great. "I walked the line, proved Law right." Number 1. Fame arrived without asking permission. So did pressure. More polish. Less edge. When Johnny pushed back, Law tapped the contract with one finger. "You agreed." On tour, someone handed Johnny a small white pill and called it help. Benzedrine. Energy. Everyone used it. The first show felt unstoppable. The morning after felt empty and shaking. He took another. By late 1957, the bank statements spread across the kitchen table told the truth. Recording costs, session fees, 60% gone. Vivian didn't cry. She just looked at him. Pregnant again, remembering his promise. In January 1958, Johnny tried Elvis's number. Colonel Parker answered, slick and distant. Elvis was busy. Johnny heard Elvis laughing somewhere far away and understood too late. That night, Johnny swallowed more pills than before and wrote until dawn. The song was a warning he hadn't followed himself. When he played it for Vivian, she asked, "Is that about you?" Johnny didn't answer. In February, they unpacked boxes in Nashville. Elvis helped carry furniture, joking, hiding his own cage behind a grin. Johnny watched him leave and felt the door close behind them both. Columbia's Nashville studio looked like a hospital compared to Sun. Bright floors, glass walls, air that smelled scrubbed clean. Johnny arrived early with Marshall Grant and Luther Perkins, guitars in cases, hope riding quiet. Don Law listened to Folsom Prison Blues without interrupting, then tilted his head like a man hearing bad weather on the radio. "Too bleak," he said. "Radio needs light." Session players appeared with charts already inked. Marshall and Luther were guided into the hallway, told to wait. Strings crept into the room, a choir of careful voices smoothing corners Johnny had cut on purpose. He sang anyway, watching the red light, trying to find himself in a sound that kept moving away. When it ended, Law beamed. "Now that sells." Johnny nodded and lied to Marshall afterward. He kept doing that, lying small lies to protect bigger ones. The hit came fast. "I Walk the Line" climbed everything that mattered, and some things that didn't. Fame pressed close, warm and demanding. Columbia wanted more of what worked, fuller arrangements, fewer shadows. Johnny argued once. Law didn't raise his voice. He opened the contract and slid it across the desk. "You signed." The first pill came backstage in Texas, a white dot on a palm with a shrug. "Energy," they said. "Everyone takes it." The show roared. Johnny felt invincible, sharp, precise. The morning punished him with shaking hands and a hole behind the eyes. Another pill made it go quiet. He learned the math quickly. By December 1957, the math turned on paper. Vivian sat at the kitchen table with a young lawyer who spoke gently and meant it. Studio costs. Musicians Johnny hadn't chosen. 60% withheld. From 50,000 earned, 18 remained. After taxes, 12. Vivian didn't accuse. She was pregnant again. Her silence asked the question. Johnny dialed Elvis in January 1958 and reached a gate instead. Colonel Parker's voice was sweet and sealed. Elvis was busy. Johnny heard him laughing somewhere off the line and understood the warning he'd ignored. He hung up slowly, swallowed more than usual, and wrote through the night. The song was about a boy who didn't listen and paid forever. When Vivian asked if it was about him, Johnny stared at the floor. At the Opry that spring, Carl Perkins found him backstage. Carl looked worn past his years, eyes honest. "I see the pills," Carl said. "I said I had it under control too. Woke up in a hospital. Lost my family." Johnny shoved his hands in his pockets so Carl wouldn't see them tremble. A phone number appeared on a greasy diner napkin. Johnny folded it away and told himself it was insurance he'd never use. The road swallowed time. 280 days a year. Calls home when he remembered. One night at a Kansas gas station, a small voice answered. "Daddy?" Johnny smiled into the metal receiver. "Hi, Princess." A pause. Then, "Who is this?" The floor of the bus felt cold an hour later. Marshall sat beside him and didn't fix anything. That winter, Columbia wanted Christmas. Bright. Safe. Johnny arrived drunk, the first time it showed. He grabbed the mic and sang something raw and broken, voice cracking where it mattered. An engineer forgot to stop the tape. Don Law erased it with a careful finger. "That's not what we sell." In May 1963, Johnny stood in a prison dining hall at Folsom and sang the song they'd softened elsewhere. When the line about Reno hit, the room exploded. These men understood the truth without polish. Afterward, one inmate thanked him for looking him in the eye. Johnny saw his own cage clearly for the first time. He left with 43 names in his pocket and a promise to write. Outside the gates, the sun hurt. Johnny reached for a phone. It had been 2 weeks since he'd called Vivian. Grand Ole Opry emptied slowly that March night in 1958, the wooden benches creaking as people stood and filed out. Johnny stayed behind the curtain longer than necessary, guitar hanging heavy. A man in plain work clothes waited near the cinder-block wall, hands in his pockets. Carl Perkins didn't smile when he spoke. "I can see it," Carl said. "The pills." Johnny shook his head, quick. "I've got it handled." Carl didn't argue. He just nodded once, tired eyes steady. "That's what I said. Then I woke up in a hospital. Wife gone. Kids gone." He tore a corner from a paper napkin, wrote a number, and pressed it into Johnny's hand. "Day or night?" Johnny folded the napkin and pushed it deep into his pocket like something sharp. By autumn 1959, the road was no longer a means. It was the whole point. 280 days a year, towns blurring into exits and fluorescent diners. Vivian stayed home with 2 small girls, learning to be quiet about exhaustion. Johnny called when he remembered. Sometimes weeks slipped by unnoticed. One night, a payphone at a Kansas gas station rang too long before anyone answered. A small, sleepy voice picked up. "Daddy?" Johnny's chest loosened. "Hi, Princess. It's me." Silence stretched thin. Then, uncertain, "Who is this?" The question landed clean. Johnny kept the receiver to his ear even after Vivian took the phone back, even after the line went dead. On the bus, he slid down to the metal floor and stayed there, breathing shallow, until Marshall Grant sat beside him without speaking. December 1961 brought Columbia's next demand, a Christmas album. Safe. Cheerful. Johnny arrived smelling of whiskey, hands unsteady. Don Law stopped the session. "Go home." Johnny laughed once, sharp, then leaned into the mic and sang something he wasn't supposed to, about a man who carried guilt every day of his life. The room froze. The engineer forgot to stop the tape. Johnny's voice cracked and bled, and told the truth. Law erased it with a deliberate motion. "That's not what we sell." Johnny made it to the trash can outside before his stomach emptied. The isolation thickened. Pills multiplied. Silence at home grew heavier. Then, in May 1963, Johnny stood inside Folsom State Prison again. This time not as a visitor passing through, but as a man who recognized the walls. 2,000 inmates watched him from identical denim, guards lining the edges with hands near holsters. The air smelled like sweat and waiting. When he sang the line about Reno, the room detonated. Not applause, recognition. Faces broke open. Some men cried without hiding it. After the show, an inmate with tattooed hands thanked him for looking at him like a person. Johnny shook his hand and noticed the marks on his own arms from constant tests and pills. Different cages. Same bars. Outside the gates, Johnny understood something clean and frightening. These men heard him because he wasn't pretending with them. He left with 43 names in his pocket, promises to write letters he would keep. The months after blurred darker. The pills stopped being a tool and became the schedule. Shows, crashes, apologies nobody heard. In October 1967, Johnny drove to Nickajack Cave with the simple plan of not coming back. Inside, the dark pressed close and wet. He lay on cold stone and waited. Instead of death, memory arrived. Jack's voice. Not loud, not holy, just present. "You said you'd do something important." Johnny walked back into the light shaking. June Carter waited by an old Chevrolet, smoking, not asking questions. She opened the passenger door. "Where to?" Johnny asked. "Home," she said. "My mama made supper." At the Carter house, coffee steamed on the table. June's mother set a cup in front of him and spoke like it was settled. "You're staying until you're better." June didn't look at him. Her hand trembled as she poured. The note waited on the kitchen table like a verdict. Vivian's handwriting was careful, controlled, every letter straight despite the strain behind it. I took the girls to my parents' place in California. Don't call for a week. I need time. Johnny sat down and listened to the house settle around him. 4 years living there, and he couldn't remember the last quiet breakfast with his family. He folded the paper once and slid it into his wallet, where it would stay. The phone rang too loud in the emptiness. A promoter needed a favor. An opening act had dropped out. A Carter girl was available. June Carter. Johnny agreed without asking details, because silence was worse. Backstage in Louisville, February 1964, June's dressing room was chaos. Clothes everywhere, cigarette smoke, a guitar leaning where it might fall. She swore when a string snapped, laughed at herself, then turned as Johnny knocked. When she faced him, the room changed. Not romance, recognition. Her eyes were tired and sharp. "You look worse than your pictures," she said. "When did you last sleep?" Johnny couldn't answer. He left without telling her. They went on in 10 minutes. They toured together for a year without naming what was happening. Friends, maybe. Allies. The road took more than it gave. In March 1965, Texas heat pressed down on a rodeo arena as Johnny took too many pills. On stage, words slipped. His knees folded, then his hands. The crowd's whistles cut deep. June ran out without a microphone, took his guitar, and sang. Her voice was steady, strong, pulling the room back from the edge. She helped him stand and finished the song with him leaning on her. Behind the curtain, Johnny retched into a metal bucket. June held his shoulders and waited. When it stopped, she spoke without drama. "You're going to die. Not someday. Soon. I watched my first husband do this. I won't watch you." In October 1967, Johnny drove into Nickajack Cave to disappear. Darkness closed around him, damp and complete. He lay on stone and waited. Hours passed. Then Jack's voice arrived, not as thunder, just truth. "You promised to do something important. If you die now, you die empty." Johnny walked out into painful light. June stood by the car, smoking. Marshall had called her. She didn't ask why he'd gone. "Get in," she said. "Mama made dinner." At the Carter house, coffee steamed. June's mother told him plainly he was staying until he was better. June poured with a shaking hand and didn't look at him. The first weeks were brutal. November nights stretched long. Johnny shook, sweated, begged. On the third day, he lay on the guest room floor, body seizing, shouting for one pill. June sat on the carpet with his head in her lap and sang an old hymn until his voice broke and went quiet. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Because someone once tried for me," she said. "I was too proud. You won't lose more years." In December, Columbia called. Contracts, threats. Ezra Carter listened and said, "Go. Show them you're alive. June drives." Johnny sang weak and honest. It wasn't perfect. It was real. In February 1968, Vivian filed for divorce. Johnny signed everything without reading. Outside the office, June closed her Bible and said, "Now you can start again." In January, he returned to Folsom, clean, terrified. The roar when he sang told him who his people were. Afterward, a man thanked him for a letter that brought his mother back to visit. "I got out," Johnny said. "From prison? From the worse one." That summer, the album stunned everyone. On a quiet porch, Johnny told Columbia he'd do another, his way. June said he'd won. "No," he said. "I just stopped losing." 3 weeks into November 1967, the guest room at the Carter house stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like a test. Floral wallpaper, a narrow bed, a chair that never moved. Johnny slept on the floor because the mattress reminded him of hospitals. The first days were noise, his own body arguing with itself. The third day was worst. Muscles locked. Sweat soaked his shirt. His teeth chattered like loose parts. "Just one," he begged, voice raw. "Drive to the pharmacy. 1 pill." June didn't move. She sat on the carpet with his head on her thighs and sang an old gospel her family had carried for generations. Her voice wasn't pretty. It was steady. When he cursed her, she kept singing. When he cried, she didn't wipe his face. She let him finish. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered when the shaking finally slowed. June stopped singing. "Because someone once tried to do it for me. I said no. Lost years. You won't." In December, the phone rang with a deadline attached. Columbia wanted him in Nashville. Christmas television. Legal language sharpened like knives. Ezra Carter listened, then spoke like it was settled. "You'll go. June drives." The studio felt colder than he remembered. Johnny was thinner, hollowed out, hands unsteady. Don Law suggested postponing. Johnny sat, took the guitar, and sang a song about opening a door to a stranger on Christmas night. His voice cracked and stayed cracked. Nobody stopped the tape. When it ended, the room didn't rush to fill the silence. "That's not what we're used to," Law said. June answered from behind the glass. "It's better." 2 months clean in February 1968. Johnny sat in a lawyer's office and signed away his marriage. Vivian asked for everything that mattered. He gave it. The lawyer tried to slow him down. Johnny didn't argue. Outside, June waited on a wooden bench with her Bible closed in her lap. "I lost my daughters," Johnny said. "You lost the right to see them every day," June replied. "Earn the rest back." In May, he returned to Folsom with microphones and a plan nobody believed in. 2 shows in 1 day. He was terrified, not of the men, but of failing them. When the roar came, it wasn't approval. It was recognition. Between songs, he spoke plainly about his own prison. No speeches, just facts. Afterward, a man stepped forward. Older now, same eyes. "You wrote my mother," Johnny remembered. They shook hands until the guard broke it apart. "I got out," Johnny said. "From here?" "From worse." That summer, the album went everywhere. Columbia called for more. Johnny set terms and got them. On a porch with cicadas, June said he'd won. "I stopped running," he said. By fall, cameras rolled for a television show that didn't ask permission. He brought unlikely guests and let the songs sit where they landed. In February 1969, San Quentin answered rage with rage. Johnny felt the room tilt toward violence and chose restraint. He cut the song short and kept everyone alive. June shook afterward. Johnny didn't. He knew the difference now. That June, he drove back to Dias. His father spoke of Jack, not of him. Johnny accepted it without flinching. Approval wasn't the prize anymore. In February 1970, under lights in Canada, he asked June a question he'd been afraid to ask. Her answer was practical, soft, final. Why not? A year later, Johnny stood on Vivian's porch and asked nothing of her. He asked only for time with his daughters when they were ready. A phone number changed hands. A promise, quieter than the first, but stronger. At home, June waited. She didn't ask how it went. "Home?" she said. "Yes," Johnny answered. "Home?" September 1968 brought cameras into the old hall and risk onto the schedule. The Johnny Cash show went live with rules Johnny refused to learn. He booked who he wanted, said what he meant. When Bob Dylan walked onto the stage, producers stiffened. Different worlds, wrong audience. Johnny stood his ground. During rehearsal, Dylan paced, distracted, then leaned in when they sang together. On air, their voices met without trying to impress each other. Afterward, Dylan nodded once. "You beat them," he said. "The suits." Johnny shook his head. "I stopped asking." In February 1969, San Quentin felt heavier than Folsom. Older walls, angrier men. When Johnny sang the new song and spat his fury into the microphone, the room surged. Benches rattled. Guards moved. One more verse, and it would break. Johnny saw it and stopped. Hard. Sudden. "Not today," he said. The words weren't surrender. They were control. The crowd settled. June shook behind the curtain, breath short. "You almost started a riot," she said. "I almost didn't stop," he answered. That summer he drove back to Dias. The house leaned like it always had. His father sat on the porch, time etched into him. They spoke of weather, of television. Then Ray said, flat and final, Jack would be proud. Johnny took it without chasing more. He didn't need the rest anymore. June waited by the car and didn't intrude. In February 1970, in a hockey arena in Canada, Johnny interrupted a song and asked June a question in front of everyone. No speech, no romance, just truth. Her answer was a small laugh and a practical yes that landed like certainty. He watched her cry for the first time and understood what staying looked like. A year later, Johnny stood on Vivian's porch and didn't ask forgiveness he couldn't earn. He asked for patience. A number passed from daughter to father. He folded it carefully and kept it. Time did what time does when you don't fight it. Calls were answered, then returned. Years later, a first album bore his daughter's name, and his hands helped shape it. When Elvis died in 1977, Johnny cried where people could see. "He warned me," he said. "I didn't listen fast enough." In 2003, old and thin, Johnny recorded one last song in a room full of artifacts. His voice carried everything he'd lost and kept. June had gone 4 months earlier. The silence knew her name. Asked if it was worth it, he didn't perform. "Ask my daughters," Johnny Cash said.